You are listening to Adventures in Sustainable Business with Jurgensen and Peterson.
Join the adventurous exploration of sustainable business.
Okay.
In this episode of Adventures in Sustainable Business, we are going to talk about the challenge of organizing for sustainability, and we're going to talk about it in the context of new business models. And our guest for today is Niels Faber, who is Assistant Professor of Circular Entrepreneurship at the University of Groningen. He has just written a book with his colleague Jan Jonker, who is a professor at the Radboud University Nijmegen. And they have written a book which has exactly this title, Organizing for Sustainability, a guide to developing new business models. Welcome to us, Niels.
Thank you very much. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm assuming, Sveinung, that I failed in all my pronunciations of the Dutch universities here, but you can both ridicule me for the rest of the episode if you wish to do so.
No, it was absolutely fine. This was completely understandable even for a Dutchman, so thank you. No worries.
Where does this podcast find you, Niels?
I am currently at the house, as many of us have been for the past 2 years. I am in the Netherlands, very close to Groningen. I live in the city of Haren, which is a very small municipality at the south of Groningen. Fortunately, we have lifted many of the blocks and the limitations in the Netherlands already, so we can now move freely, a little bit more than we used to. And we're regaining a sense of what life was, which is interesting.
And part of what you have done during the pandemic is to write your book about organizing for sustainability and about new business models. And we met for the first time, Niels, at the New Business Model Conference in Berlin a few years ago. And at the time, I remember that you and Jan told me about your work on this book, your plans to possibly publish it open access, which you now have done. The book was then eventually published in 2021 and already now I can see on the Palgrave website that it is downloaded more than 122,000 times. So this book is already successful and gaining traction. But could you give us a little bit about the background for the book? You know, what is it that you wanted to, what was the problem that you wanted to solve, if you will, with this book? What was the questions that were driving your work on this particular piece of work?
I'd like to bring you back to the origin of the book. So the book started not as an idea for a book, but the idea started with a piece of teaching that Jan and I did, which goes back, I think, to 2016, if I'm not mistaken. So in 2016, I joined a team of teaching sustainable entrepreneurship at the Radboud University of Nijmegen, and somewhere in the development of that course, so this was in, I think, 2018, we started doing that for the first time. We entered into that course the concept of the hackathon. So students needed to be taught a lot about what is a sustainable entrepreneurship, what is a business model, what is a sustainable business model, how do you make that? And at the end of the course, there was a hackathon. So for 24 hours, the students were in a pressure cooker, building up that thing that they had conceptualized. And the inspiration we got from the hackathon, the international hackathon that runs in Groningen every year, the Odyssey hackathon, and Jan visited that event, I think in 2017, with a friend of his who said, "This is great. You should have a look. It's amazing. You have people coming from all over the world, and they get questions and challenges, and they need to work on that, and they have for that roughly 48 hours to solve, and they do that, and it's done by a small team with an enormous amount of people around that help them to support that in all manners possible, and they have tooling." And that was one of the tricks that we also entered into that. So the hackathon was built, we organized it, we had experts coming in. So we had experts on the problem itself. We had experts with regards to the applications of IT. We had experts in the field of business models. That was ourselves. So that was quite convenient. And we brought in tooling. And the tooling is exactly what is the core of the book. The business model template has its origins in that piece of work. It was an 8-pager in which we said, well, if you think about sustainable business models, think about a series of building blocks. And I'm doing it by heart, but let's say we had about 8 building blocks. Something about a value proposition, something about you need to organize this as well. Sounds good that you also think about how you capture revenues. And that 8-pager was given to students, and they needed to work with that. And of course, we received feedback that it was nice to have, but incomplete. And that sparked the whole process of pushing that a little further. What if we piece together a book in which this business model template that was not called at that moment in time? What if we do that and we invite a few people that write the book with us, and each of us develops one of the parts. So there would be a part in the beginning saying, well, it needs to have proper introduction. So what's the origins of business modeling, and why would you do that? And why would it be sensible to have something of a model or a tool that you can work with in order to develop it for yourselves? And we, of course, got a lot of inspiration by the original business model canvas, which is already dated back from 2002. And we did that. With 13 people, we sat together in a, sort of pressure cooker, 2 days in a row. This amazing building on one of the still existing very old estates we have in the Netherlands, very close to the University of Nijmegen. And we were able to use that facility for almost for free. And we sat there with 13 people, everybody, in two teams of 2-3 people working on chapters and building up that book, all in Dutch, all still not with in mind, let's go international, but just in Dutch. Let's address the Dutch audience in this way, and let's help them to understand what business modeling is all about, and help them also to do that themselves. Gives them something in hand with which they can develop their own sustainable business. So we've had not just people from an academic background. We had them, of course. We needed to have them because you need to have some depth in your work. But we had also practitioners bringing in cases in which they applied things, or in which they were able to push that theoretical conceptualization that we did even further, and saying, well, but then this is what it means in practice. And that's exactly what we did in developing the Dutch book. And then, then we got this crazy idea from 2 guys from Norway.
I wonder who that was.
Jan was very much impressed by the way you approached your book when you did it in an open access fashion with Polgrave, and we just decided to see whether we could walk the same path, and we got in touch with Polgrave saying, okay, we have a book, we have an idea. We have the book already, but it's in Dutch, so it will not really suit your market, so we need to translate that. And we would like to publish it with you in open access. And they agreed. And then we started to do the work, and we translated it, we edited it, we made sure that every example that was in the Dutch book was given an international counterpart. And it was developed, I think. Well, we had a little chat before this already, but I think the book in the current shape, in the Dutch form, I think it took us 6-7 months to really go from, not just the translation, really go from the Dutch version to an international version that has everything substantiated in a way that reaches the international audience.
In addition, you have made a MOOC now on top of that, and listening to you describing how you made it, it's also kind of a description of a business model behind the book, because you have 3 business models generic in your book. You have the platform model, the community model, and the circular business model. And in many ways, the whole process here, you and Jan working together, but also with these co-authors from the academic field and also from the practice field, and also involving students here, it sounds kind of a community business model. Am I right?
In a sense, yes. I must give the credits to Jan for this, because this has been the way that he's worked for the past years, and many books have been created this fashion. I mean, this book for us, for Jan and me, is the 3rd one in a row. We started first with a book which was just giving a view on the state of affairs with regards to circular economy in the Netherlands. that was published in 2017, in which we just sketched out the state of play. What is a circular economy? What does it mean for the Dutch context? And how many businesses actually are doing something with it? It was, in a sense, it was a nice effort, but also a very disappointing study in that regard, because very few companies actually took steps towards circular economy. And from that came a second book, which was much more of a workbook. What if you would like to do that? So this was a little bit of a practice prior to the book that's now on the table, which was also just a digital publication that we published ourselves. And then we had the chance to do it in, well, let's say, in a more serious fashion with a serious publisher with a serious marketing instrument behind it, and then this came out. Yeah, and you mentioned the book. Sorry, the MOOC, which was developed in parallel, but that has a very different origin. Originally, this MOOC was only to be about circular business models, but that project did not fly as it should have been. There was nothing done, but this was also not really our project in the first place. But we were in contact with the people involved, and all of a sudden, we were working on the book, and then we had the idea, well, why not team up? Why not use the book as the basis of the whole MOOC?
And for those of us, I'm sorry for interrupting, Niels, but for those of our listeners who are not acquainted to the term MOOC, a massive open online course, I was the one who said it first, so it was my responsibility to say it. But it's an open online course for anyone who wants to learn more about this and do it in practice. So, because you said it was one purpose of the book was to solve this problem with the students and the participants there and then. But when you talked, you also said there's another problem here. Very few companies wanted or were able to design a circular business model. So I guess that's another purpose of the book as well, to reach out with more knowledge to those practitioners out there on how to do this in practice.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned that, in all honesty, the intent of the very early versions of the tooling of the business model template were indeed just to be used in educational setting, having our students working with it, seeing what they can do, push the envelope, see where the model fails, what needs to be added. But as you also have sensed in the way the book was developed and how we composed the team, we intended specifically not just students with the book, because the book has a much wider reach than just teaching. I mean, teaching, you know that yourselves, it's in traditional teaching. I mean, it's in a classroom, and that's the confines within which you can convey your message. The book has a reach which, and particularly the international book, which has a reach which is unfathomable. If you write a book, you have no idea who's going to read this. We've now people, I'm following the LinkedIn streams about it a little bit, people in South America praising the book, saying, well, this is great. I don't understand the language, but Google Translate helps me quite a lot there. So, and I think that was a good thing that we made that choice deliberately in the beginning, in terms of, okay, what's going to be the audience for the book, but also how are we going to compose our writing team, that we include not just people from academia, which is, I mean, for us commonplace, but also include people who are in practice and are working with similar or the same methodologies, and have them reflect and have them write things in ways that in which they also can communicate to the people in practice. And then the MOOC came, the massive open online course came. As I said, it was a different project, but there was, at a certain point in time, it was very interesting, very relevant to combine the paths of both the book and that MOOC. So the book became the platform, became the building block for the rest of the MOOC. Nothing was developed yet, so no pains to resolve. And we took care of the organizational part of the project, so the content organization and the operational organization. And we developed the whole MOOC and it also cost us quite a lot of time. That cost us roughly 9 months in total to do. Yeah, but for every chapter in the book, and we have 7 chapters in the book, if I know a little bit more, but we divided in 7 chapters for the MOOC, and following the similar structure as the book to some extent. And every chapter is accompanied by at least five videos, if not more. There are certain parts of the MOOC which have more depth, so more videos are added. And those were recordings of ourselves, and then we needed to add additional materials. And this, in an iterative sense, we developed all the parts of that MOOC, and then we decided to put in an eighth chapter for the MOOC, which was tooling, just instruments that were more general and could be applied for more of the chapters. And that we did with also with a team. I don't recall the numbers here, but there were some 20 institutions in the Netherlands involved to do this. All schools of higher education, all universities chipping in and building it up.
But it's a fascinating aspect of the open access, both book and massive open online courses, and for that matter, other kinds of open teaching platforms. We've done similar things, and it's funny how when you've written the book, you're sort of a little bit done with it. But what happens, and I like Sveinung's link to this community idea, because it really generates this kind of communal interaction with the material in a completely different way. So the lifespan of a book and of a video or whatever becomes much larger because people interact with it. As late as yesterday, I got a message from a journalist who had come across one of our open access videos that we made as part of our open access program. And suddenly someone comes across it a couple of years later and it sparks some new interaction. So there's something about that sort of communal dimension that I think is very, very interesting. And you mentioned, Niels, in not in passing, but you mentioned earlier the business model template, which is, of course, one of the cornerstones, if you will, of the book. Much of the content is organized around this model that has 3 stages, and I like this sort of partitioning very well. I like it very much. This definition stage, the design stage, and the result stage, and each of these 3 stages have different aspects to them that go into this logic of the business model template and how to work with the design and development and organization of business models. So perhaps we could challenge you to take us through these 3 stages of this business model template: the definition stage, design stage, and result stage, and what they tell us about the challenge of organizing and designing and implementing more sustainable business models.
Okay, I'll give it a try. And normally I do this with an enormous set of slides, which help me to tell that story in a more eloquent way. So in a nutshell, 3 main stages. Every stage has a series of building blocks around which you develop that stage. And in the way we have pieced together the whole BMT, we follow the sequence of design theory. So we always start with, okay, you would like to build something. So, but what are the characteristics thereof? What is the contours? What does it need to do? So that's where we have the definition stage. Define what you would like to realize. In this case, define the essences of the business model that you would like to realize. And I think this is important for everybody to understand, also the people listening to the podcast. Everything in the book, everything that we do in the business model template is inspired by the idea we are not in the game for just business models for profit. This is really about building sustainable business models. So many of the building blocks and the way we describe that in the book, and also how we have put these together in the MOOC, comes from that background. So there are things that you need to think about, which you probably will not think about if you have not a sustainable mindset. So that as a sort of precondition before you start working with the thing. So in the definition stage, we were looking for, but how do we help people to define things? And we did it in 3 building blocks, if I recall correctly. So there is something about a motive. So why would you do this? what is the problem which you would like to address? What is bugging you? And this may be something. You walk out the door. I mean, this was the example that we discussed while writing the book. You walk out the door and there's something of garbage laying about, and that you see that constantly. That's something that confronts you on a daily basis. And how are you going to resolve that? So you start with the motivation. Why are you in this? What is your drive? And then following upon that, of course, is, but what would you like to have? So what is your ultimate dream? Define utopia. What would be the most excellent solution for that? Well, and then you have contrast, right? And you have the problem, the lowest point at which you can be, the thing that you would like to resolve, and you have, well, the tip of the mountain which you would like, the pinnacle you would like to work towards. And then last but not least, you need to make it practical, because you can't go from well, the deepest well to the highest peak in one shot. So you need to find for yourself a point which you think you're able to reach within set time. So that's why you develop your value proposition, the last thing of the definition stage. When you have these three components, you've set context. You have a context now, a context where I come from, where I would like to be, and so also the point which I would like to realize inside my efforts here. And with that context, you have the ingredients to start the second stage, which is the design stage. And that's something that we are still not too sure about, but we thought it would be handy to first start thinking about what kind of business model would you like to realize, what is most fitting for the value proposition you have. So finally, you already said it. We have three flavors, right? So we have the platforms, and we have the communities, and we have the circular business models. And well, depending a little bit on what you would like to strive for, you choose either one of them. So is it going to be something of more efficient use of stuff, of assets? Go for platform. If it's much more about solving a problem inside a community with the community, it's more about the community business model. And if you are much more about building systems in which materials are used, reused, etc., go for circular. It's as simple as that. But we also recognize we can have cross-sectionals. Why not do platforms together with the circular business model? So that's where the journey starts. And now I need to do this by heart. I need to memorize it properly. There are a few building blocks you need to address. So there's something about with whom would you like to collaborate, or who do you need to collaborate with? So you need to identify your parties and what is your expectation from them, and what is your relationship with them, and are they able to make true what you think they need to do for you? So that's a part that you need to address. Then something about your own organization. What's your strength? What's your strong points? And what of the business model will you take care of yourself? So if you're in production, you have a production facility, I think it automatically tells you, well, I'm quite well at doing production on this thing, so let's do that. And then a third element has to do with strategy, because and also here we are not entirely sure whether this is the proper position, but we still think that strategizing within a business model is a good thing to do. So what's your long-term perspective here? How do you see that value proposition developing over time, and what kind of modes of operation, what kind of strategizing do you take into consideration there? So that's one. So then we have 4 building blocks in that design stage, and then we have a 5th one. In the BMT, it has a different color. And that's on purpose, because that is where everything you've done in the definition stage and in the design stage, you basically put to the dogs and see what's eaten. You test it. It's the external test. See what works, what does not work. Let it be criticized. It is something that when doing things in the whole of the BMT, it's repetitive. So it's done at smaller steps in all the different building blocks. But this is because you're doing the design and you're now finishing up the design. This is explicitly done a larger external test. Give it to someone else, someone you do trust. I mean, there needs to be a basis of trust, but who is also able to criticize you. And I mean, we know what criticism is, right? It can be nice. It can be pat on the back, well done, please go on, but it can also be fierce, and particularly if it's about ideas. This is an idea. This is a conceptual baby, and the conceptual baby dies very, very hard. So this can be painful, but I mean, the pain needs to be experienced in order to improve it.
And you have the result stage, and you can come back to that. But everyone who has worked with these processes in practice knows that this is hard work. It's hard to come up with these dreams and to make these value propositions and go through these archetypes, talk with parties that are involved, the stakeholders here, working with the strategy long term, and then finding out what are we supposed to do. And this external test that you describe here is extremely important, and I guess also the learning process here, from going from those first napkin ideas that you might have together with some friends on a bar, testing it by talking to colleagues, friends, customers, or other stakeholders, and then going back and redefining it and working with the value propositions and so on. And I'm curious about the result stage here. So you shall come back to that. But this external test, when you run this together with companies, for instance, these kinds of processes, do you usually do that on a day, for instance, or do you have any experiences where you have done this over some time with real companies?
We have no experience with applying the BMT in the whole, but the people that have been fiercely writing on this part were very strong on the development of this, because they did it themselves, and this was for themselves. I mean, they were in this case also the subjects of the external test. Their ideas were tested, and what I recall from the discussions we've had is that this was for them the best of ways to learn things, to really see what are the limits of my thinking, what choices that I make are acceptable, good, and what choices do I really need to reconsider. And I think that's also how you should, as a person, if you are in the mode of doing the external test, position yourself. I mean, you can be, of course, going into the external test, say, well, I'm the victim and everybody's bashing me. But you can also take the other approach. No, I mean, this is also something that I see many students in this role, right? Many students come and then they get feedback and they say, but this is not honest. But that's not the point here. The point is here that you open up for insights from others. You have just one mind. Your organization has just a limited amount of minds. And why not have someone from the outside have a look at what you do? And I think that for everybody, and including me, that's the best of ways to learn things and to see how you can improve yourself, how you can improve your thinking, how you can improve your business model. So on purpose, we put in the external test, and on purpose, we also ask the people that do this on both ends to be vulnerable. But vulnerable in the sense that you are that you accept the feedback from others, and that and the people that give you feedback are also constructive.
This is difficult enough when we work with business models, regardless of sustainability. And this result stage, the last of these three stages with measuring impact and values created. How do you integrate sustainability into this?
The result stage basically is it tries to make operational the promises that you make in your value proposition. So that's the idea behind this. In the result stage, you try to capture the question: what does the business model provide, or what does it deliver? What values does it generate? So the first one is the impact building block, in which you are asked to rethink through. Okay, what if my business model is in operation? What would that mean? What impacts will it make? And impacts not just in terms of, okay, this is the amount of money that I earn, because that still is on the plate. I mean, we are not building business models that do not allow you to earn money. But particularly looking at sustainable values. What kind of ecological or social impacts do you make? And not just direct impacts, but also deeper lying impacts. And the question is not that you have the ultimate answers to this, but the question is here, think about that. Can you identify the impacts that you can make? Can you identify them on ecological grounds and on economic and on social grounds? And to what extent can you do that? So what if you're an organization, you're in a supply chain? Are you only considering the impacts of your own organization, or are you taking into consideration all the players in the supply chain? And what if you do that? What does it then mean? Does it mean that you will start to make other choices? Or are you going to report about this transparently to your customers? I mean, then these things are becoming possible. So in one way, it's making things measurable. On the other way, it's also ensuring that you have a tool to communicate. So that's on the impact. And the last one is the values created. In values created, we have two things that we address. It resembles very closely what we know from business modeling, the revenue model, right? So on the one hand, it asks you to be very explicit about the transactions, the transactional models that you allow for in your business model. So what's the basis of your earnings? Is that sales? Is that leads? And so this is one of the things that you address there. And the second thing is making very explicit the promised values in your value proposition. So and trying to quantify them as much as possible. So it's very similar to impact, but impact has a longer stretch. It's really about building up a narrative. Okay, this is the impact I want to make in my context. And values created is much more, a little bit more mundane, saying, okay, well, these are the values that I can immediately show. This is what I generate. This is what I create. And this is also where in transactions with us, you are contributing to.
What I like about the business model concept is this sort of idea of layers, if you will. We can talk about, as we're doing now, about the single business model that some entrepreneur or an established incumbent firm, wanting to change one or more business models from the existing to a new business model. But then also there's this second layer of the business model as something that is embedded in an ecosystem of many business models, and not just business models, but other kinds of institutional arrangements, and and this broader context within which the business model resides. And I think several aspects of your business model template touches on exactly this. Consult with parties who are involved, and all that stuff. And I want to quote from your epilogue, because this is a book about organizing, like the title suggests, and there's a chapter or a subchapter called New Models of Organizing, and I really I liked this, so I'm going to basically quote it, and the quote goes like this: "Working with truly new business models will necessitate different organizational relationships, more horizontal and digitally facilitated within networks. The current distinction between citizens and companies is likely to partially disappear or fade away. People are suddenly not just citizens, but also entrepreneurs or self-investors, because they might start a solar park or set up a car-sharing system. Call it do-it-yourself entrepreneurship, which leads to home-generated electricity, managing an orchard together, or setting up a time bank in the neighborhood combined with a smart grid. The possibilities really are endless." And that's the end of the quote. And the reason why I chose to lift this full quote is that I think it points at, part of what I think of as some ultimate objective of sustainable business modeling, not just at the level of the single entrepreneur or the single business model, but also this idea that we innovate together, we innovate across, and that the organizing puzzle that you are addressing in your book is not just about the single entrepreneur organizing his or her specific business model inside this one firm, but as I understand you are in some sense playing into a broader vision of organizing for better societies, smarter societies, and so on. And I hope you'll care to comment on my little improvised reflection.
Oh, thank you very much for the reflection. My short response would be I agree. And then comes my longer response. I agree, but and my butt needs to be filled in further. No, I think you touch upon a very fair point here, but this point not only was raised in our book. I think this point also came back multiple times. For instance, last year during the NBM conference in Halmstad, the New Business Models conference that we did in Halmstad. And there we finished on a large reflection with the question, what is the level at which a business model is operating? And that was exactly this. Is that something that is tied to a single entrepreneur? Is it tied to a single organizational entity within an economic context? Or does it also operate on higher echelons? Why not on the level of ecosystems or regions? We are even talking about urban business models. There was a study done on that as well. And I think in that sense, the business model concept, because it's a concept that tries to capture value creation, it does not say I'm capturing organizational value creation. It says it captures value creation in its essence. And I think that is also why it lends itself so nicely to scale up. And now a but comes. So I agree with you. But the but is very important to recognize as well. The term business model, or the use of the concept business model, does not always. When talking about business models, the assumption is almost always made that this is confined to a single organization. Yesterday, I had a meeting with people for a new project, also on the formations of ecosystems. But the term business model is not something that's very common to that level of thinking. So the ecosystem, we know things about entrepreneurial ecosystems. They have to have plug-in systems to help entrepreneurs to develop their organization, those kind of things. So that we have, but really talking about business models at that level is quite difficult. And one of the things, and I think that's something that we do address in the book a little bit more elaborately, has to do with thinking in terms of organizing across organizational borders, because that's exactly what this is all about. And for that, for organizing within an organization, we have a great many of things that we can look at, right? We can even go back to Francis Taylor and Henri Fayol to learn some management science and how to piece together mathematically an organization and say, well, this is working and it's efficient, and then people from sociology and psychology give us a few additions saying, well, but you also need to think about the people and they need to find themselves well in the organization. But it's still confined to that single organizational perspective. And now the question comes, what kind of tools, what kind of instruments, what kind of mechanisms do we have across organizations where we can really connect to business organizations, or, and now it comes, a business organization to a group of people, a group of citizens who also want something? The question is there. There was a little bit work on this done by Jan in the past in his book New Business Models, which was really about community business models. But this question remains to be quite unanswered. So I agree. I agree with you fully, Lars, but I also see the problem. And I think this is one of the questions that needs to be addressed in the upcoming years. Not just to beef up the concept of business models, because it's just a concept. And we need to figure out whether that still helps us in 10 years from now. But if we are serious in developing our societies towards a sustainable future, we need to find ways to collaborate across organizational borders and across the different realms in society. So we need to be able to have teams between government agencies and businesses and citizens alike.
I was very happy, Niels, when you described the BMT, and you were in the middle in the strategy part, and you said, "We think this might be important. We're not quite sure yet, but we think this is important." Because we meet so many people in this field of sustainability and business models that are so sure all the time. They kind of have the solution to every problem, and that makes me a little scared, because we're dealing here, as you say, within an organization, between people, and an organization. And there's so many facets here, and there's so many things that are not sure. And as researchers with a practical DNA in a way, or a gear, we need to be unsure. I think we need to ask these questions. And reading your book and listening to you today, I really feel kind of confident on the book and the future of this book, because when you can combine both giving knowledge, having all the great examples, and providing language, providing frameworks, and also providing questions that people can work in different settings, and kind of then trusting people who are sitting with those problems, defining those problems, dreaming out those goals, and seeing, okay, what kinds of results do we want in addition to the revenue or the typical profit part of revenue. I find this very inspiring, and thank you for putting down the work with the book and the MOOC, as we've explained today. I hope people out there will download the book, read it, also take part of the MOOC, which they could. It's a course where you could do in your own pace.
And if I can jump in, I believe that it's hosted on the edX platform, isn't that right? And we can link to it in the show notes to the book as well, so our listeners can find it.
Yeah, it's hosted on the edX platform, but it's hosted physically by the Saxion University of Applied Sciences. They have the access to that platform. Yeah, but you can use that link. I think you have that link already.
We are very grateful, Niels, that you joined us for this conversation about the challenge of organizing for sustainability, both within and across organizations, business organizations or otherwise, that you shared with us not just the background and the purpose, the process by which the book and the MOOC came into form, but also many of the core ideas of the book, as they are captured in the business model template, as they are captured in the cases, and the questions, like Sveinung rightly points out, that the book raises and that we all need to put a lot more work into working with, because always this field is developing. There are always more unanswered questions when we start answering some of them, and I'm happy that in this conversation we've both had some answers and some questions, and we look forward to follow your work, both you, Jan, and your colleagues going forward. So thank you for joining us on Adventures in Sustainable Business.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
You have listened to Adventures in Sustainable Business with Jurgensen and Peterson.
Visit us at jurgensenpeterson.no, where you can find more information about this podcast and other information about our work. And if you like the podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review.